All right, welcome back everybody to the Auburn Undercover YouTube channel. Nathan King here with Jason Caldwell. Jason, it's really starting to feel like fall camp now. It's starting to really heat up. You got the band practicing across campus. Everybody's starting to file back in.
Yeah, full campus, traffic everywhere. A little bit of a breeze. It's hot. There's no question about that. Yeah, starting to feel a little bit closer to football season.
Yep, and the pads are coming on. Shells are coming on. As the coordinators told us today, today was the second day with the pads on at practice. So that's what we're going to break down today. We talked to both the coordinators today, offensive coordinator Philip Montgomery and defensive coordinator Ron Roberts, as they completed, I believe this was day 4 of fall camp. Starting to get into the nitty gritty here. Obviously, the first few days are getting your feet wet. Now things are starting to ramp up a little bit. We know the quarterback reps are going to trim down. So I guess we'll start there. We'll start with Philip Montgomery and what we heard from him. Of course, a lot of the focus right now is going to be on the quarterback. Apart from him giving great details on each guy, he said, you know, what you'd expect heading into this first scrimmage. He said, I want to see somebody step up. I want to see somebody take control. We saw that last preseason. It was pretty clear after a scrimmage or two that TJ Finley had a much better grasp of the offense. We'll see if that starts to emerge from a guy like Peyton Thorne. We're going to find out a lot this week because this is when they want to start trimming down the reps.
It is, and yeah, you know, we saw that too. We saw it happen with TJ Finley last year, and he wound up not being the starter later in the year too. So what we've learned already, whether it was Hugh Freeze, Philip Montgomery, I think it's going to be an ongoing process. This is absolutely a huge part of that this week, to see the progressions going into Saturday, into that scrimmage. We heard from Philip Montgomery, and we heard lots of positives about every quarterback, and I think that's the thing. I think they've seen a group that has improved. We've heard that. How much does that show up in a scrimmage situation? That's now the next big thing for this group as they look to narrow it down to 2.
Yeah, and a couple of the big takeaways from each guy. We continue to hear about Peyton Thorne, his leadership ability, sort of parroting the exact things we heard from Hugh Freeze. I thought it was a great quote from Philip Montgomery saying, hey, I've got to chase him out of the building. Sometimes the same thing that Hugh Freeze says, where he'll just get text messages and calls all the time because he's been studying a lot of tape. Obviously, that's a guy who wasn't here in the spring, so that's something you'd expect to see from a veteran quarterback who's coming in fall camp. Robbie Ashford, Phil Montgomery said he's thrown the ball better. That's been the biggest progression. Obviously, everybody knows how well he can run the ball. That's obviously the biggest thing for him because inaccuracy was something he struggled with a lot last season. And then the wild card of this whole thing is Holden Gariner. Really talented passer. You go back to the previous staff. What did guys like Brian Harsin, what did his teammates say? They said he throws the prettiest ball in that room. You're hearing those same sorts of things right now. And so I think, you know, most people assumed, oh, you know, they'll cut it down to Thorne and Ashford. I think Holden Gariner is the guy, and we'll see what happens in this stadium here on Saturday. He's the guy who could maybe throw a wrench into this situation if he keeps progressing really well.
Yeah, no, I think it's a three-person battle. I think that's what we've seen going in. A lot of people say, oh, it's really just 2. No, I think it's 3. I think there's 3 people involved. And you know, I thought it was interesting to hear each remark, whether it's Philip Montgomery talking about him throwing the football, whether it was Montgomery talking about Robbie Ashford, and the one thing he said was, look, he's improved throwing the football. That's what he needed to do. They've seen some of that. You know, and then obviously Peyton Thorne is going to be, okay, what does he show in a game type situation? They saw the other 2 guys in the spring. They haven't seen that from Peyton Thorne here in this offense. And so now all those variables go into what I think is a really big day on Saturday.
Running backs, obviously still without Jarquez Hunter at the moment. We've got some confidence that he could return at some point this week. We'll see how that goes. We'll be at practice tomorrow as we record this on Monday, be at practice on Tuesday. But I thought the comments were interesting by Philip Montgomery saying, hey, we're kind of going by committee right now. Not necessarily surprised when you don't have Hunter at the moment, but I think even once Jarquez Hunter re-enters the mix, which we expect him to do, they still have an opportunity to have a little bit more of a by committee approach, and it's because of how well Damari Alston has done, and a guy like Jeremiah Cobb. He said he had a couple good runs at practice today. We continue to hear good things about him early in fall camp.
Yeah, you know, Brian Batiste, the guy that I think they know after the spring what they've got in him, bringing him in from USF. He's got a lot of experience. He's played a ton of football. Damari Alston, very little bit. Jeremiah Cobb, none at all. So this has been big for them to get those extra reps, and not surprised to see Jeremiah Cobb being a guy that's made plays. This is what he's always done. And so I think you look at this running back room, and it may be a blessing in disguise in the end that they're getting these quality reps and so many of them early in camp. If you get Jarquez back and get him rolling, then he's a guy that obviously has experience, has played, was there in the spring. So you start talking about kind of what it does, it could really improve that room as a group heading into the season.
Yeah, I mean, a guy like Jeremiah Cobb, like you said, I know he's been your guy for a few years now. You've been watching him play for a long time. He's a guy who maybe wouldn't have had an opportunity to get first team reps like he has been the past couple days. You know, splitting them with the other running backs if Jarquez Hunter had been available. Wide receivers, we continue to hear the same names that have been kind of buzzing not only throughout camp but all summer long. We continue to have people tell us in different ways how good Caleb Burton is. It's different ways of explaining what he's brought to the table. Philip Montgomery said he's another guy that you've got to chase out of the building. A fringe 5-star recruit that was playing at Ohio State, obviously, is a guy who brings a ton of talent to the table. We've seen him slide in there at the first team, seen him work in the slot, seen him work on the outside. So far, the impressions have been that he is a guy who could really impact the offense this year.
I think what we've seen is they're trying to figure out ways they can get him on the field. That's the first order of business. When you find a guy like that, you go, okay, can he play? Second of all, where all can he play? And if he's a guy that you can move around, then it doubles value. That's always been the key. Can you move a guy, play him different positions, and make a defense have to look for him? Because that's the key. And so Caleb Burton, I think, is a guy that can do that because, he's 5'11". He's not the biggest body guy, but he's big enough he can play outside. But I think he can play inside too. And you can move him outside. You can play him inside with Javarius Johnson inside. You can do a lot of different things. But I think the wide receiver group, early takeaways, wide receiver group, O-line group are two groups that they feel like have gotten a lot better since they walked on the field in the spring.
Yeah, Jay Fair continues to be a name that gets hurt a lot in the slot. Montgomery saying he's playing a lot more comfortable in that position going from year 1 to year 2. You mentioned the offensive line. I thought something that was important that was brought up by Philip Montgomery is seeing a bright side, or seeing, looking at this positively of all the competitions. Obviously, I'm not saying it's negative, but he said a positive of this is that they can try to build that 2 deep. It's been a long time since Auburn has had 10 offensive linemen that they feel pretty confident about in the 2 deep. I think they're in a pretty good spot to have that at the moment. There's still competitions going at both guard spots. You wonder whether Connor Lew could work in one of their. Right now it's Tate Johnson, the left guard, and Cam Stutz at right guard. Of course, Jeremiah Wright was a starter there in the spring. So those are the primary competitions right now. But I agree with Philip Montgomery that you're in a position now where these competitions, regardless of who ends up the winner, could bode pretty well for both depth this season and in the long term.
Yeah, no, I think you look at it. You look at bringing in a guy like Jaden Muskrat, he's played tackle, he's played guard. That gives you another, much the same way that Caleb Burton, if you can play inside and outside, same thing on the offensive line, it gives you added depth. And so normally guys will try to find 8 offensive linemen, somebody that can play both tackle spots, somebody that can play both guard spots. But you think about a guy like Muskrat, he can play tackle and guard. Obviously Cam Stutz can play both guard spots. Jeremiah Wright can play both guard spots. I think the addition has been the tackle spot. Can Dylan Cinda step up there? Garner Langlow, is that a guy that they can feel more comfortable about playing? A couple of those extra added spots, but I think there's been some valuable reps, and there's going to be more of those coming in the next couple of weeks.
Flipping to the other line of scrimmage as we get into what we heard from Ron Roberts today, defensive line has been one that we've had our eye on, how they're going to move guys around there. We mentioned Keldrick Falk has moved from that jack outside pass rusher position to a true defensive end spot, and unsurprisingly, we know how talented he is. Ron Roberts says he's a guy who can compete for that starting job.
Yeah, I mean, you got Marcus Harris there, Wilkie Denaud, another true freshman in there. Keldrick Falk's going to play. You're going to see big number 15 playing this season, and he looks unlike any other 15 you'll ever see in Auburn history. He's 6'6", 288 right now. He's going to get on the field, and so that was one of those things that not really surprising to hear. Something else that wasn't surprising, Nathan, was the love for Jalen McLeod. We've heard about him. We've heard about him since he got on summer and how impressive he was in workouts. He's continued to do some of those things in preseason camp.
And he mentioned, too, unsurprisingly, something that Elijah McAllister mentioned at Media Days, more of a third down specialist, smaller guy, more of a twitchy kind of pass rusher. That's something that Auburn hasn't had recently. They've had guys who have been, kind of playing every down. Derek Hall and Eku Leota could stay on the field a lot. Speaking of Derek Hall and the importance of getting a good pass rush for this team, as you mentioned earlier today, the only sacks they're bringing back this season are from Marcus Harris and from, is it Hayden Brice?
Hayden Brice.
That's the other sack.
That's the 3 total sacks from defensive linemen that returned from last year. So 3. Marcus Harris with 2, Hayden Brice with 1. You lose everybody else from that front group. That's why it was valuable and hugely important to bring in those guys. So, Jalen McLeod, Steven Sings, how much can they add to Elijah McAllister at that position? What do you get from the other guys? And then the push up front. That's going to ultimately determine, in my opinion, how good this defense can be.
Yeah. For sure. It's a linebacker-driven defense, was the words
Yes.
that Ron Roberts used, and that becomes an interesting competition. It is one so far that's been intriguing. Obviously, you have 4 or 5 players. When we talked to Josh Aldred in the spring, he said, I want 4 or 5 guys that I'm going to utilize like starters every single game. Who are those guys going to be? You've got the 2 returning starters in Cam Riley and Wes Steiner. Austin Keys, we've seen Larry Nixon, number 30, work in there. Robert Woodyard is the guy that keeps coming on. Eugene Asante. Maybe a little bit forgotten about. He got some praise today.
Yeah, no, I've been watching it, and he's been kind of getting into the mix, and basically he is the forgotten man.
Yeah.
We came in last year.
He's a good recruit in high school.
He's bigger. You can see a little bit more to his body, but we asked Ron Roberts about him. Look, like he's a sudden guy. He's really athletic. He can run, not afraid of contact. He said he's going to have a shot, and so you added Eugene Asante to the mix, and all of a sudden you look and there's some depth at that linebacker spot. Can you find a couple of guys that can step up and be playmakers?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I looked up what Ron Roberts told us in the spring. Hey, here's how many guys I have that are able to contribute right now that he feels confident in. He actually gave the same number answer. He said 16 or 17.
Yeah.
So meaning they still have to get some guys step up in that 2 deep for him to feel confident. They will scrimmage inside Jordan-Hare Stadium at 9:20 on Saturday morning. Jason, both Montgomery and Roberts, sort of similar outlooks for this scrimmage on Saturday. They just said they want to see both of their groups play more comfortable. Tempo was a big word. That was a big focus today on day 4 of practice, particularly for Ron Roberts. He said, we know the guys have looked good in practice so far. Can they go out in a game setting and have that same kind of comfort level?
Yeah, I think you look at it normally, having done this for a long time, scrimmage number 1 is, hey, effort. You got to see the effort. Who stands out? Who makes the extra effort plays? And, no pre-snap mistakes on offense and defense. Those are always the killers. Can you do that? And that's usually a mental thing. And then can you find a guy that makes plays? That if you find those things in scrimmage number 1, if they come out of that and go, hey, we did this, this, and this, I think you'll find some coaches that'll be pretty pleased.
Yeah, and it also gives the youngsters an opportunity to go and continue to get more comfort, get their feet wet, because like Ron Roberts says, he says, I've seen it in flashes so far. But again, what does it look like in a game setting? Like you mentioned, playmakers, all those guys in the secondary, they've got some newcomers on the D-line. Are they going to take advantage of this opportunity to make some plays?
Because here's the thing. This is the ultimate first cut down. You think about it in terms of NFL. The same thing happens in college. This is the first cut down scrimmage. If there are guys that they feel like he is too far away, automatically you're going to start moving towards a scout team roll down the line. So if you want to get into playing rotation, you better show up Saturday.
For sure. We're going to have coverage all week. Looking forward to Saturday's scrimmage. We'll get the defensive assistant coaches later on in the week. I'm going to have a couple practice availabilities, so it happens with Jarquez Hunter. Continue to keep an eye on the quarterbacks. Should be a fun week. It's the first full week of practice, obviously, because they started last week on Thursday. So be sure to check it out at auburnundercover.com. For Jason Caldwell, I'm Nathan King. Thanks for joining us. We'll see y'all later.